Hello there everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Joesephyr, and in today's video we're going to be ranking all of the Final Fantasy games on Tier Maker, including Final Fantasy 16. Now I've played every Final Fantasy game pretty extensively, so I'm now able to kind of give an opinion based on where I think each Final Fantasy lies. So if that's something that interests you, then stay tuned and keep watching. So as you can see over here, I've made a tier maker kind of system for Final Fantasies, and I've made my own icons for it because it was kind of getting on my nerves. I saw like all these icons, I didn't like them, so I thought I'll just make my own. And I'm also going to do a little makeup thing whilst we talk about these, because I thought to myself, it's something I do quite a lot, and a lot of people have been asking me about one look I've been doing in particular that's inspired by FF16, so I thought, screw it. While we're having this discussion, why not just go ahead and do all of it? So, with all the Final Fantasy we've got there, so we've got 1 to 16, and I've also included 7 Remake, so don't worry too much about whether that counts as a mainline title. I think it does. I personally think it does, but a lot of people think it doesn't. So I just kind of went, well, you know, I'll include it, and then people who think that it don't can just ignore it, and then we can go from there. So I guess the best place to start is going to be the beginning. So we're going to start with Final Fantasy 1. Now, I personally believe that FF1 is the strongest of the NES trilogy. I think that it's the most pure example of a Final Fantasy, it being the first. I think FF2 did that weird thing that a lot of NES games did, where the sequel would be completely different to the original. I still like FF2, and I will be taking into account all versions of FF1, as you quite rightly say, they're Meteor, so it's kind of like a general consensus. And I am going to say this is all opinion based. There are no facts behind necessarily anything, and one of my favorite things about Final Fantasy is the fact that everyone's list like this will look different, and I love that. I think that's a really strong thing for the franchise as a whole. We've seen so much discourse about, is like X game a Final Fantasy? Is it not a Final Fantasy? And I thought, you know what? I think something like this will create a really nice discussion for just the franchise as a whole. And if you disagree with the things that I'm saying, I encourage you to do so, because I want people to kind of showcase their favorites, why it's their favorites. So if you've got comments or anything like that on what we want to talk about here, by all means, let loose. So going back to FF1, I'm going to put FF1 solidly in B tier. I think that it's a great game. It's short, it's concise, it gets the job done, it showcases a lot of what Final Fantasy is about. I respect you and love you, and with love and respect comes honestly the fact that I cannot stand FF1. See, this is what I mean though. I think it's great to have these discussions, and it was just so, you know, it's lovely to see such a difference, because I think that FF1 is stronger than FF2 and 3. Purely because I think that the conciseness of the nature of the game, I think that there's optional sort of quests that you can do and you don't need to. Speed running, it's really fun. I've learned a lot when I tried to speed run the first 6 games in 24 hours playing FF1. Pixel remasters are really good. Dawn of Souls is really good. And I think that a lot of it comes down to FF1 just being the foundation for everything that Final Fantasy is. Right, so we're going to talk about FF2 now. So I do think that 2 is the weakest Final Fantasy. I do. And for that reason, I'm going to put it in C tier for now. I might... the D tier is there more as like a placeholder than anything. So in fact, I'm just going to rename this placeholder for now. Because if I'm not sure on something, then I'll put it in here. Because I don't think there is a bad Final Fantasy. I genuinely don't. And because of that, I think that it's good to sort of look at these, and honestly, my experiences with Final Fantasy, the worst experience I've had with Final Fantasy is still a great game. I've played FF2 a bizarrely large number of times, and honestly, I couldn't even tell you why. I think I've grown an appreciation for it over the course of time. I even made a video, like, talking about why I think FF2 is still a really good game. Because I think the characters are actually quite engaging. I think the story, for its time, at the very least, was very interesting. And I don't even hate the combat system in FF2. I think that the combat system in FF2 paved the way for the Saga series, which was really interesting. I think that... also, yes, I'm putting, like, bruising, essentially, on my face right now, and it will make sense later, don't worry. You know, I think that having the stat growth is something you see a lot in Western RPGs at the time. So I think it actually was a pioneer for a lot of mechanics that we see even in games today. So I think for that reason it's noteworthy. But never in my life have I played a game that tried so hard to waste my time. The dungeons with the dead end doors, just the absolute units that come and fight you in droves of 9 at a time, all of which have status conditions and when they attack you. Oh, it sickens me. And then I sit there and I play it. I've loved playing the Pixel Remaster version of it with all of the speed ups and everything like that, and I've got the Platinum Trophy for it and everything, so I've played 2 to death and I know a fair amount about it. But I think, being realistic, even though I still quite like it, I do think it's the weak. So now we move on to Final Fantasy III. Now Final Fantasy III is a weird one because there's 2 of them, technically. You have the 2D one and you also have the 3D one. So the 2D one, I thought, I like the Pixel Remaster of it. I have played the NES original on an emulator. I just think that it's paced really poorly, and I think that there's not much of a story to go off of. Certainly not when compared to the other 2 NES titles. It's very kind of simplistic, and there's a lot of you get a lot of characters that just appear for 2 seconds and then don't do anything. And as much as that's true of FF2 as well, I feel that their impact is greater. Like Minwu has a greater impact in FF2 than say Aria does in FF3 or Desh. Whereas the 3D version, I do think improves upon it, and I do think that the introduction of the class system is is something that's paramount to Final Fantasy as a whole, and I think that it's something that's noteworthy. However, even despite that, I'm still going to put it in C tier. I still think it's a C tier game, and I know that people might come for me. To be fair, I'm sure people are going to come for me one way or another with this list, regardless of what else I put down. But like I said, I just think that it's it needs to create discussion. But I do think that the class elements are there, but I also felt that so many of the classes on the jobs in FF3 just felt superfluous, as opposed to later games that use the job system, like FF5 or obviously 14 and stuff like that. I just think that it's too basic. I found that it's basic, and for that reason, I'd say 2 and 3, I'm happy to put them in the C tier. Okay, so now we're going to move into the Super Nintendo era. And I think that the Super Nintendo era is where people are going to argue with me, I think. I think people are going to argue with me over this. So I'm going to just get this out of the way now. I think 4 is a B tier game. I think it's better than FF1. I do think it's better than FF1. And I think that people who have played FF4 like since its inception love FF4. Like, they really love it. And I get it. But I think in hindsight, it's one of the most simplistic Final Fantasies, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think it has an extremely strong cast. I think it has a very strong cast. But, and this goes for the 3D remake as well. I've played both the 3D and the 2D versions of FF4, and the PSP version, including After Years. We don't talk about After Years. If there were a D tier, After Years would be in it. But this is just the mainline titles for the time being. Maybe if people enjoy this, maybe I'll expand this into like the entire franchise, because there is only one game that I can think of that I haven't played in this franchise, and I've played a lot of most of them, and I'm planning on playing the other one, so just putting that out there. But 4, I think it's very stop-start, and I think a lot of people give a lot of credit to things that maybe don't necessarily deserve it. So my first port of call here is a lot of people really love the 4 Fiends. I don't really see what separates them from any other boss except maybe Rubicante. Like, they don't actually do anything or add much to the story. So I don't feel that, like, the music is great, but the music across the board is great. I'd say 4 is A, strong summons, relatable characters. I'd say some of the characters are relatable. I like Cecil. I think Cecil is one of the best protagonists, apart from in combat. Cecil is weirdly bad in combat, and, you know, maybe if I enjoy making this kind of video, what I'll do is I'll start, like, tiering the protagonists in terms of their combat prowess, because if we did that, Cecil would be near the bottom. It's like, okay. And I feel that there's a lot of elements to 4 that certainly at the time were amazing, but I feel in comparison to 5 and 6, they haven't aged quite as well. So for that reason, I've put it at FF4 at B tier, but I think a lot of people would have it higher than that. So now we're going to move on to FF5. We're going to move on to FF5, and this, I don't know if this is going to be a hot take or not, because I feel that 5 is really hitting its stride lately. Like 5, I'm just going to put it here. I think 5 is an S tier game. I think if you're talking about just the game, the story, sure, it's a little bit more subdued than the other FF games. But as a game, certainly for its time, I genuinely believe that 5 has aged the best out of any of the pre-PS1 era, maybe even including the PS1 era Final Fantasies. Because it's just such a pure experience. There's so much you can do with 5 that you like the ways in which people break the game. 4-job fiesta, speed running, challenge runs, using Berserker when you're not supposed to, because Berserker sucks. And like, yes, exactly that as well. It has a sense of humor, and the earlier games don't really have that. I think that there's so much joy to Final Fantasy V that a lot of the other games sort of like dive too heavily into the melodrama. And, you know, it's nice that sometimes a game doesn't have to necessarily take itself so seriously. But people say that 5 doesn't take itself too seriously. Let's not forget that Exdeath's castle made of flesh and is kind of creepy. Like, you know, I think that 5 is one of the strongest aging Final Fantasies, although as much as I would put it in S tier, and the reason that I worry that I put it in S tier, because if you followed me for a long while, you'll know 5 is one of my favorites. But I know that recently, some of the developers, or the lead developers in FF16 cited 5 as their favorite, and everyone's like, yeah, 5 was my favorite too. And it's like, okay, well, when I said it was my favorite, a load of people read me to filth, but hey, you know, whatever gets people playing the game, right? But it introduced Gilgamesh. It introduced the job system, like, done correctly, the malleability, the versatility. You know, we were talking about Final Fantasy IV. You know, people talk about games being railroaded now. Final Fantasy IV is heavily railroaded, and until right near the end of the game, when you can go to like the Sylvan Cave or the Summon World, places like that. But I think that 5 just opens itself up because of how you play the game, as opposed to like the story beats and how you beat each part of those games. So for that reason, you can come for me all you like. FF5 is S tier. All right, so now we're gonna start hitting the big ones. Okay, I'm gonna start hitting the big ones. FF6. I don't need to tell anybody that I'm putting it up here. I don't need to tell anybody that I'm putting it up here. You know it's amazing. I know it's amazing. Everyone knows it's amazing. However, this might be a hot take. I'm actually going to put it below 5. And I'll tell you why. I have an issue with games that punish you for playing the game properly until the point where you're allowed to actually play the game. Like, the way that you are punished for leveling before you have access to espers really winds me up. Like, to the point where it's like, that takes it down a couple of notches for me. And I think that system hasn't aged especially well. And for that reason, I'm putting it below 5, because I think that 5's simplicity is what has allowed it to age so well. How does the game punish you? Right, so the thing with FF6's Esper stat boosts is that when you level, if you have the Espers equipped, you get stat bonuses depending on which one you have. Now, obviously, you don't get the Espers for a little while, so from the beginning of the game, where's your stat boosts coming from? Yes, but FF6, I think that everything else about FF6 is flawless. Like, the story is amazing. The character's amazing. Well, the characters are largely amazing. I think Hefka is one of the greatest villains, and I think that is where Final Fantasy V falls off, is that Exdeath is an okay villain. I don't think he's rubbish, so I don't think I give it minus points for that. But I don't think that Exdeath even compares to Kefka, like, not even slightly. But I think that, like, FF6 having so much room to move and having so much personality, it's hard to put it any lower than S tier. Like, there's so much to do in it. There's so much to explore. And it's just a great game. Like, if I recommend anybody a classic Final Fantasy, it's 6. Just because I think that 6's story will grab you much, much better than FF5's would. Even though I like FF5 as a game more. Like, I think that FF6 is always going to be the one. There's a few, and I'll mention them as I go, but FF6 is the one I would recommend to new players who have never played a Final Fantasy before, but want something retro. Go with FF6. It's the right one. Okay. So this is the big one, right? So people are already talking about it. I'm going to go with my white eyeliner because I am holding my breath so I can get that right, but also because I think that people are going to think this is a hot take and they're going to come for me. 7 is A tier, not S tier. To me. And let me explain why. 7 is an iconic game. It is absolutely, for its time, incredible. And a lot of people have very, very strong nostalgia for Final Fantasy VII, and with very good reason. Very good reason. The iconography of Final Fantasy VII is so well known, it's up there with your Zeldas, your Marios, your Tetrises. There are not many icons of the gaming industry that match up to Cloud and the Buster Sword or Sephiroth walking out of the fire in Nibelheim. There just aren't. 7 is funny, it's charming, it's well balanced for the most part. The characters are some of the best that we've ever seen. So why is it A tier and not S tier? The pacing. Honestly, I think it's a lot of it has to do with the pacing and the pacing of gameplay at the very least. The materia system is a little bit wonky, if you ask me, compared to the simplicity of other games. I like the customizability of the materia system. And to be honest with you, there's a part of me that wants to put it in S tier still because of its legacy, because of the fact that it is such an icon. But the last couple of times I've played it, I haven't enjoyed it. And I couldn't help but feel that the major story beats of the game don't gel together as well as I would like them to. But I would love to hear from people who love FF7, because people do love FF7, and everything I've said about the other Final Fantasies can apply to 7. Challenge runs, modded runs, speed runs, all sorts of things like that. That still applies to FF7. But I do feel that there is an element of FF7 that I think that people have nostalgia goggles on for a lot of it, and they're entitled to. Like, everyone's experience is their own, and that's why I encourage people to disagree with what I'm putting here. But for me, I felt that the nostalgia goggles were so strong that playing it as an adult, it just didn't quite feel the same. A bit off of what are currently being talked about, but have I tried playing with the new threat mod? I have. I've actually tried playing with a few different mods, and I know that a lot of people really like the voice acted one, the new threats of the higher difficulty, some of the graphical mods that you can do. The last time I played FF7 was using a bunch of mods, and I have played new threat previously, and I definitely think that they add longevity to that game. But I think what we're talking about right now, which is just the game in its purest form, without modifying it, because FF5, people say, oh yeah, but you said that about FF5. Yes, I did, because none of it requires external means. All of it can be done within the confines of the game itself. You don't need to have a mod for the PC version of FF5 to do what you do with FF5. You kind of do with FF7. And I do think that it's a bit slower paced than a lot of them, but I still think it's an amazing game. I just don't think it's as high for me as 5 and 6 and a couple of others. I'm seeing in my chat, and and I agree, and I think a lot of people will feel this way, that they would flip 5 and 7. Totally respect that, totally get it. So now let's talk about 8. 8 is a very contentious game, very contentious. I don't think that 8 is as strong as some of the others, and it has nothing to do with the combat system. I adore the combat system in 8. I actually think junctioning is fun. I think it can be very breakable. I think it's very silly. And I think that you can absolutely play it the way that you would any other Final Fantasy. Like, people like to say that you're punished for leveling in Final Fantasy VIII. You are, in the same way you are FF6, and that's why I haven't put it in like a higher tier than B. My issue with 8 is the storytelling. Like, if your name is not Squall or Renoa, in that game, you have no bearing in the story. Like, none. You have nowhere, there is no place for you in the story of Final Fantasy VIII if you are not one of those two characters. All of the party characters feel completely superfluous. Like, somebody tell me what Selphie's role in the game is. Somebody tell me what Zell actually does in Final Fantasy VIII. Irvin has a couple of minutes to shine, and then the twist is, it, like, makes him one of the worst party members Final Fantasy's ever had. Quistis could have been amazing, but they dropped her like a rock really quickly. So for that reason, I think Final Fantasy VIII is high B tier. I think that the story that is present for Squall and Renoa is actually quite strong. It also brought us Triple Triad. And you can't fault Triple Triad. Triple Triad is S tier in terms of mini-games. And maybe one day I'll rank that, because I actually really like 7 for its mini-games as well. I think 7's mini-games are some of the best. But I know a lot of people don't like the motorbike. I like the motorbike and the snowboard. Don't come for me. But I thought that 8 has a lot of strengths that people like to ignore, but it's also got some weaknesses that can't be ignored, and that's why it's B+. Okay. This is not a hot take. I don't think this is not an. I don't think this is a hot take at all. Actually, is it? I love 9. 9 is my favorite game. 9 is my favorite Final Fantasy alongside 5. However, have you played Final Fantasy IX recently? 9 has my favorite characters. 9 has my favorite story. 9 has my favorite progression mechanics. The combat in that game is painfully slow. Painfully. As somebody who recently got the Platinum Trophy for 9, yes, I've got Excalibur 2, yes, I've done the skipping rope, yes, I've got all the treasure chests. The biggest thing that sticks out to me about Final Fantasy IX is the combat's pacing. I think everything else about that game is nigh on perfect. Nigh on perfect. But that singular element really does hamper me. It's just, and I think it's a product of its age. So maybe there's an element of bias here. So maybe, oh god, it would hurt me to put my favorite under 5 and 6, because that would make 5 my favorite now, and I'm not mad at that. I'm not mad at that. But I do think that 9, as much as I adore, I think that 9 is the game that needs updating most. And yes, we've seen all these rumors of remakes and things like that. I was actually tempted to put Tactics in this list, because I do think that Tactics deserves recognition as a mainline title, but it don't have a number in it, so I'm not putting it in here. I'll put it in another one. But I think that 9 gets 90% of everything bang on correct. But the 10% that it doesn't hurt. As a child, 9 would be up here. No questions asked. Not even batting an eyelid. But with modern games coming through, I think that is. Surely the strength of a game isn't the same thing as personal preference, though. No, but basically my metrics are a combination of what I enjoy as well as what I would recommend to others. So there's a kind of a dichotomy of subjectivity and objectivity. So it's, you know, at the end of the day, I expect that everybody's list will be different. And I want everybody's lists to be different, because that's what makes the franchise so strong in the first place. So if people disagree with what I'm saying here, please do. Leave those comments. It's what I want to see. Right, so FF10 is going to be really interesting, because Final Fantasy X is not my favourite Final Fantasy. I know it's a lot of people's favourite Final Fantasies, but my reasoning for it not being mine is because I simply don't connect to a lot of the characters. So I feel that that's a very subjective reason to not put FF10 anywhere other, quite frankly, than here. And I know that people are going to go, oh my god, you've not put your favourite at the top. What's wrong with you? If anyone ever asks me which Final Fantasy is the best one for people to start with, this is the one I go for. I think that it's the most complete experience. We don't talk about FF10-2. We don't talk about FF10-2 for that. Ignore that. We'll come to that another day. I believe that Final Fantasy X has a phenomenal combat system. The additional turn-based CTB. There you go. I had to think about that for a second. I think is the strongest combat system Final Fantasy has ever had, and likely will ever have unless they go back to it. I think that the story is poignant. It's emotive. It definitely plays on the heartstrings more than many of the Final Fantasies, except 7 and 6. 7, the trouble with 7, I think, with the emotional impact for a lot of people, is that because Aerith's death is so well known and so iconic, you're desensitized to it before you've even started playing the game. If you've never played it, you know it's coming. Because everyone in the gamer sphere has never stopped talking about it. And that's for a good reason, because at the time, fun fact, it was spoiled for me on the bus to school. Fun fact. But Final Fantasy X, a lot of people don't go into the minutiae of why that game is as emotional as it is. And I think that it's such a powerful story because it's very human and it's very relatable. It's a love story. And that's something that is just timeless. And that's the word I use to describe FF10 and 5. Timeless. I think that, they're very, very powerful things. I'm not sure that makes the game worse, though. It feels like a bit like conflating people's opinions with actual writing again. Potentially. But going with the metrics that I'm using, I always recommend 10 to everybody. Like, I cannot think of any reason why you wouldn't recommend 10 first. I think that it's just powerful. It's complete. The end game of FF10, I think, is one of the strongest there has ever been and probably ever will be because it's so vast. It's just a fantastic game, and even though it's not my favorite, I can't see any reason why to put it any lower than right at the top. So, mild confession, when I said I played every Final Fantasy, I might have been telling a white lie. There is one Final Fantasy that I haven't played, but I own it, and I'm going to play it. I want a group to play it with. I don't feel that Final Fantasy XI is something that I can experience like solo. I want to experience it as close to the way it was intended as I can. I know that the game is so beyond what it was when it first came out, when it was new. It's difficult to compare it then to what it is now. But I think it would, because a lot of what I'm talking about in this ranking relates to how well a game has aged, which is why 5 is so high and 4 is lower. I think that that's something that is worth talking about with Final Fantasy XI. Is Final Fantasy XI worth playing in this day and age? So, forgive me for telling a little white lie. But it is literally the only FF game that I haven't played, and I still know the story for it very well. I'll be honest and say that I can't really rank it until I've played it. So, moving on to FF12. So this is obviously going to be different. Now, because you could take this in two ways. If we were taking 12, just as it is, on its own, no Zodiac Age, no nothing, I'd honestly put it bottom of B, top of C. Zodiac Age, however, elevated it so much. And I think that it deserves recognition for that. I think 12 is at the lower end of A grade. And the reason I say it's at the lower end, I can't even put my finger on why. I think that FF12 is a fantastic game, and the story building is so rich, and the world. I think that Ivalice is my favorite world in terms of world building in a Final Fantasy history. Like, yes, even over Eorzea, or Etheirys, or whatever you want to call it. And the characters, I think, are a lot stronger than people give them credit. However, they just don't have the same impact from a point of comparison to those in the games I've ranked above it. I enjoy 12 a great deal. I think the end game of it's really fun. The hunt system was really good, although that's not aged especially well. Go to person A, go to hunt board, go to person B, go find the hunt, go back to person C, go back to person A again, then go to the hunt. It was a conflama and a half. But I think that its story beats and like the nuance in FF12 is something that has aged very well. The gambit system is something that people hadn't really seen before, and so at the time of their release they were a bit kind of confused by it. Oh, why is everything automated? I don't know about this. But in hindsight, you look at games now, there's a lot of expansion from that point that really kind of take advantage of what FF12 set as a precedent. And I think that because of that, it's hard to ignore FF12's place in the world. And I think that there's a lot of merit to 12. I enjoy 12 more and more each time I play it. And I think that because of it, I just really like the game. And I think that it definitely doesn't elevate itself above the others that I've placed up in the higher tiers. But I definitely think it's worthy of its recognition more than the ones below it. Okay. 13. This is a weird one. 13 is a strange one, because I feel that over the course of time, 13 has gotten more and more recognition for being more than it was. I have a real disdain for the use of the word corridor simulator or it's too linear. All of them are linear in their own ways. You cannot turn around and tell me that 13 is linear, but 10 isn't. 10 is as much a corridor simulator as 13 is. I still think that 10 does it better because 10 breaks it up with towns and things like that. But I don't think it's fair to have that be your primary or one's primary criticism of 13 when other games are just as guilty of it as 13 is. I think that it's kind of crazy to me. And I do also think that the paradigm system is a really inventive use of the job system. I think that it's really quirky, it's interesting, and it does things differently, and it makes it kind of very snappy. The problem with 13 is its characters and its story. And for that reason, I'm putting it at the lowest end of B tier. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's worse than 2 and 3. The characters just don't have the same punch as any of the characters in the games above them. And disturbingly, that includes FF1. But I think that there is a lot to love about 13. The last time I played 13, which was on stream, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was brilliant. But I still can see its weaknesses. Like, I can still see that the story's not quite as poignant as a lot of the other games above it. I don't think that it quite has the same emotional impact. The characters just aren't as likable for the most part. Although I will say I do actually quite like Hope, and not a lot of people don't like Hope. I actually do. But like, the end game of 13 is also kind of janky. Like, when you get to the final boss, there's no real explanation for why he's there. You have to play, like, you can tell that 13 was the first part of a trilogy. And I think that that is a weak spot for it, because it means that you kind of, I have a real pet peeve for any kind of media, I'm looking at you, Marvel, where you have to consume other products and media to get the most out of the thing you're watching. I like a complete experience, and I don't feel that 13 was that. If you combine it with its sequels, so Lightning Returns and 13-2, it's a much better experience all around. But I'm not including the side games in this list, unless you count 7 Remake, which I don't. And because of that, I just don't think that 13 deserves to be any higher than where I put it. Let's talk 14. First things first, I want to turn around and say that my original gut reaction was that I wanted to put each of the expansions for 14 as separate titles. Because to be honest with you, I'm gonna put 14 all the way up here, either side of 10. I can't see that those two are completely interchangeable for me because they're very different experiences. But I'm actually gonna put 14 right at the top. And the reason for that is that I think that it's cheating almost to put 14 on its own. But I've had this discussion with people before. They're like, no, 14 is like, you know, Stormblood, Shadowbringers, Endwalker, they're expansions. I'd say they're as much a sequel as 13.2 and 13.3 are. Like, you know, they are complete stories in and of themselves. Most of them are referential in big ways to the other like entries in the FF14 universe, and you do kind of have to play one before you can play the next. But then what separates a sequel from an expansion, and what separates a mainline title from a non-mainline title? Is it because it's got the number? But for argument's sake, I'm putting it in there as a single entity. I'm putting it in there as a one thing. And I don't think that it's a paralleled experience. I've never played an MMO other than Final Fantasy XIV. Ever. And I think it's spectacular. I think the characters are some of the most lovable in the entire franchise, or in fiction, period. Or games fiction. I think that the stories, yeah, it's a slow burn, but it's meant to be a slow burn. We'll cover that when we get to 16. It's meant to be a slow burn. It's something that you're supposed to take your time with. You can't rush 14. Cannot rush 14. And I do think that if we were to be ranking them individually, I'll make a quick note. Shadowbringers would be where I've put 14 now. I think Shadowbringers is the single strongest experience from a story perspective from any of them. Shadowbringers was flawless as a story-based experience. The MMO experience is quite vastly different to the single-player experience, so you could argue that putting 11 and 14 in this list doesn't count. But if you don't like it, you can skip these sections. You don't have to watch this bit. You know, just ignore the fact that they're on the list at all. But the amount of time that has been put into 14, the amount of, you know, spectacle that is present in 14, the emotional impact of 14, it's very hard to ignore. Like, it's super strong, it's super lengthy, and we all know that number of hours is the most important thing in a game nowadays. And I just think that it's a fantastic experience, and because of that, I would put that up there with FF10. For modern Final Fantasy, 14 is modern Final Fantasy. Okay, so the way I'm going to finish this up is I'm going to do 15, then 7 Remake, then 16, because 15, 7 Remake, 16 is the order of release. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to anyone who loves 15. I think that I still enjoy 15. Let me put this out there. I still enjoy 15. I don't think it's a bad game. But compared to everything above it, it is an incomplete experience, even post-Royal. It's better. I think the combat in 15 is monotonous, to be honest. I think that there's a lot of, you hold one button down, there's very little challenge in it. The spectacle peaks at the midpoint of the game and then nothing quite matches up to it. The characters are fine. Like, I don't have an issue with the bros or the Choco Bros or some of the side characters, but I do think, and 13 is very guilty of this as well, but 13 I think has a better combat system, which is why it's that one step higher. No, I don't think 13. I don't think 15 is worse than 2 and 3. That's dramatic. I don't think 15 is worse than 2 and 3. There are a lot of characters in both of those games that feel wasted. So, Jill Nabat in 13. That is the worst offender. I think that Core, Iris, I think there are tons of characters that just could have been extrapolated or like expanded on. Luna Freya, Lunafreya is actually a particularly egregious sort of one for that. And I think it's just the combination of all of the elements of 15 just kind of like, compared to the ones above it. There's nothing in 15 that really gets me going like the ones above it, apart from the Leviathan fight. I think Arden could have been an amazing character had he had more screen time. That includes his DLC. His DLC really helped him, but he just was kind of wasted. And I think that, you know, having character, or like, we know that there's the book for 15 as well. And if you read the book for 15 and see where the story could have gone, I'd have loved to have seen that play out. I would have loved to have seen how that played out. But sadly, it's never going to happen. And because of that, 15 feels incomplete. And it's hard to rank it any higher than where I put it there for that reason alone. Alright. So, again, much like 11 and 14, whether you consider Final Fantasy VII Remake to be a mainline FF title, honestly, that term is kind of superfluous to me as well, but I had to start the video off somehow. I think that 7 Remake deserves to be called a mainline title, primarily based on the budget that's gone into it and the buzz around it. Like, you know, it's... What makes a mainline FF title? We've already had discussions of what makes a what makes a Final Fantasy because of the discussions around 16. So what difference does it make? But so I've just gone with the numbered ones, but I think I'm making an exception for 7 Remake because of its status more than anything. So again, you can absolutely ignore this part of the video if you like. So where does 7 Remake sit? I am going to put it right next to Final Fantasy VII, actually. I was very much of the opinion that 7 Remake should never have happened. And I blame compilation of FF7 for that. The thing that I was most scared of with FF7 Remake's release was that it would have no sense of humour, it would be all melodrama all the time, and it would be exhausting like Advent Children or Dirge of Cerberus or anything like that. It's just constant melodrama, and I was pleasantly surprised. I loved the War Market section of 7 Remake. I think it addresses some of the issues that 7 had back in the day. I actually really enjoy the combat in 7 Remake, and I'm looking forward to how it will get embellished upon in 7 Rebirth, because I think that kind of combination of ATB and real time is a really nice combo. And I want to see how it progresses, because I do think that when you get to the end game, hard difficulty, all of that, you kind of get like a build that works, and I'd like to see a little bit more versatility than that. But it's still an amazing game, and the fact that it kind of subverted expectations and had people talking about it for months, that's a mark of a good story to me. Like, a lot of people will argue that the story's no good because it's not a remake, it's kind of a sequel, it's kind of not, it's really ambiguous. But ambiguity is a narrative tool, and Final Fantasy VII Remake uses it really well, and the realizations of the characters is really good. However, my nerves are still there for 7 when it comes to the greater experience, because I was somebody that felt that, like, Sephiroth as a villain was an icon due to his mystery, not knowing anything about Sephiroth. Like, you barely see him in FF7. But in 7 Remake, they kind of shove him down your throat, and I don't know how I feel about that yet, but I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt until I've seen the rest. So, taking it as its singular experience, I enjoyed 7 Remake from start to finish, to be honest, and I think that I enjoyed just all of it. And I don't think it's yet to beat the original 7, nor do I think that it beats the 5 at the top of the list, for me personally. Would I recommend 7 Remake to new players? Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would. I think the 7 Remake is a great platform for people who have never played an FF game before to start on a new story, be left at a point of wanting more, and knowing that we're going to get more. So I think 7 Remake really kind of hits the mark on that. So this is the one that people are probably watching this for. Where does 16 sit in a tier listing of Final Fantasies? I think this game is going to be extremely contentious. Very contentious. People are going to say they either love it or they hate it. A lot of people have already decided they hated it because it's not a Final Fantasy, and I think that's a ridiculous statement because Final Fantasy is, you know, has changed its way a lot of times in the past. But I also respect it. I do also respect it because people are allowed to make their own metrics on what they think is what they want from a game. So for me personally, and I'm going to pre-warn everyone who is watching this live and those of you who aren't, I have finished 16, I have platinum 16, I have done everything there is to do in 16, so I have an opinion on where I would put it. If you haven't, please feel free to come back at another time if you want to, or if you don't care about what I'm going to talk about, I certainly won't be going into story spoilers or anything of the like, but I am going to talk about my experience with the completed product. For me, 16 sits about... it's either here, here, or here. But I'm going to put it here. I'm going to put it here. And I know people are, like, to me, there's a part of me that wants to put it below 7 because I think the idea of putting it above 7 just kind of, like, feels weird to me. But 16 is a fantastic game. It is fantastic. There is a lot of love poured into every character in this game that I can't fault. I can't fault. So before FF7 is crazy, trust me, I'm sitting here hovering. In fact, I'm going to put it there. I can't put it above 7. I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm gonna double back. I might end up putting it back again, but I'm like, I don't know. I think that the presentation of 16 in terms of the visuals, the voice acting in Final Fantasy 16 sets a bar for what voice acting in a video game should be. And what it does, like exactly what is being said there, I think when this game lands, it lands hard. The opening couple of hours of Final Fantasy 16, I think, are some of the strongest I've ever seen in a video game, period. It's phenomenal. However, I think it has pacing issues. I think that there are a lot of times where you go through 16 and you feel like you're not doing a lot. That's true of a lot of RPGs. I get that. But it feels really poignant in 16. And I get where they're coming from. Obviously, the team that makes 16 is Creative Business Unit 3, which is the same team that makes 14. You can tell a mile away how much this game resembles 14. Like, it does. And I think that that is both to its benefit and to its detriment. Side quests in the game feel very nothing. Like, it's like the story and the lore and the world building for Valisthea is fantastic. You have to actually want to do the thing to get to that though. And when every other side quest is kind of fetch questy, it's kind of annoying. I'm obviously streaming this at the moment, so once I finish with this, it's going to be a case of I'm going through arcade mode on its highest difficulty, and that definitely knocks it up a few points for me, because I think that the presence of a challenge mode in and of itself is great, and I think the end game of Final Fantasy 16 is pretty good. It's not up there with your 10s and your 14s, but it's pretty good. And I think that the story is 99% amazing. I think it's the most anime Final Fantasy I've ever seen. I think it's the most anime Final Fantasy I've ever seen, and that's some people will love that. Not sure. Like, the combat is really good for the most part. When you get to endgame, I do feel that there are certain routes you have to take that make you not play it like it seems like it's intended. But I do think that there's a lot to love about 16. Like, honestly, like, even with the criticisms that I've given it, there was no point at playing the game where I thought, I don't want to continue playing this. Not once. I think the cast is extremely likable, especially the minor characters, which is really bizarre. Like, characters like Gav, Byron, some of the side quest characters, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Clive, I think, is one of the best protagonists we've had for a very long time because of the range that he has. I think that the opening couple of hours, I don't think there's ever been a point where it quite matches up to that again. Like, at least not until really near the end. So if you're going into it expecting that, like, heavy punch all the time, you're not going to get that. And I think that it sets a precedent, which is what... That stop-start pacing, it feels like the MMO, whilst also trying not to be FF at all. And I think that that's kind of at odds with itself. But the points where 16 lands, they land so well that I would put it as high as I have. So I think I'm happy with my placing for it there. I think between 7 and 7 Remake, because I want those kind of three to be like, yes, this is kind of the benchmark for me, I think. So, like I said, I encourage people to disagree with what I've put here, because this is, I guess, the complete list. If you want to see me do a complete list with all of the spin-offs as well, I mean, for starters, I'm going to have to make more icons, because I've made these icons myself because all the other tier list ones I saw, I didn't like the look of, so I made these myself. And then I'll leave a link in the description box if you want to make a tier list like this yourself, and I'll give a link to this, because I'll be really curious to see what you guys think and how much you, like, completely differ from what I've said. And yeah, let me know what other kinds of things you would like to see with stuff like this, because I love making discussion. I think this is something that I really enjoy doing, and doing a look like this is my Sid kind of inspired look from FF16. So I really enjoy it, and I've really enjoyed kind of like putting all of my skills into place at once. So thank you very much for watching. If you are watching this over on YouTube, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications of any other videos I might be making, and let me know what you think. So thank you very much. See you next time.